The Back to the Future trilogy is deservedly called iconic, and for many it remains one of the few bridges to a nostalgic childhood or youth. Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale came up with the story about a high schooler long before 1985, when one of the finest adventure films hit the screens. In September 1980, the friends signed a screenplay contract with Columbia Pictures and got to work. But from the start, they faced misunderstanding. In the early 80s, the highest grossing films were those with harsh ratings, 18 and older, featuring violence, alcohol, and brutality, with absolutely no sci-fi elements. The creators of Back to the Future were told that their film was too childish and that much of the potential audience would ignore it because it lacked violence. Zemeckis and Gale worked hard, rewriting the script twice, but it was all in vain. No one wanted to invest in the project. However, everything changed in an instant when the roaring success of Romancing the Stone, directed by Zemeckis, came in 1984. After that, all the producers suddenly wanted to make Back to the Future. The project was very fortunate with its cast. It's hard to imagine anyone other than Michael J. Fox as Marty McFly, or anyone other than Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown. Everyone perfectly embodied their roles. However, Marty was initially played by actor Eric Stoltz, as Michael J. Fox was busy filming the TV series Family Ties. The producers of the show feared a drop in ratings and refused to let Fox venture into the world of big cinema. Interestingly, the role of Doc Brown also didn't initially go to the actor the creators had in mind. They hoped to cast John Lithgow, but he was busy with another project. Thus, Christopher Lloyd became Doc Brown. When filming finally began, Zemeckis quickly realized that casting Stoltz was a big mistake. According to the director, the actor was too serious, as if he were filming in a drama rather than a comedy. Stoltz never broke character, even after takes, and demanded that his colleagues address him only as Marty. Additionally, Stoltz struggled with skateboarding. About a month into filming, the director and producers made an unprecedented decision and fired Eric Stoltz. All we can do now is wonder what Back to the Future would have been like with an alternate Marty. It's easy to find plenty of photos from the set online and even some footage with Stoltz, so we can still get a sense of it. During the production of the film, its title could have changed multiple times. Back to the Future almost met the same fate. The original title was liked by everyone except the head of Universal Studios, Sidney Sheinberg. He couldn't understand why the film had future in the title since Marty was supposedly returning to the present. He sent the creators a memo suggesting they rename the movie to Spaceman from Pluto, based on a joke Marty makes in one scene. Fortunately, producer Steven Spielberg came up with a clever solution. He wrote a letter to Sheinberg praising the great joke with the new title, which had given everyone a good laugh. Naturally, after that, the studio head didn't dare admit that it wasn't a joke. But the film still went through changes. In the original version, the main character was involved in video piracy, and he traveled back in time using a time machine made from a refrigerator. The idea of the refrigerator was later scrapped. Zemeckis feared that kids might start climbing into refrigerators after watching the film. He was right to be cautious, as the movie left an unforgettable impression. When the writers shifted to the idea of a time machine in the form of a car, they initially thought it should be some kind of off-road vehicle with tracks that could move in a time when there were no roads. The DeLorean appeared by pure chance. Zemeckis came up with a scene where a farm family in the 1950s mistakes the time machine for a flying saucer. The original limited edition sports car, the DMC-12 DeLorean, with its gull-wing doors and shiny stainless steel body, looked futuristic enough to pass as alien technology in the eyes of ordinary Americans. Even now, the car still looks futuristic. To create the frost effect on the car just after it returned from its journey, nitrogen was used. The DeLorean was literally frozen. As for the fiery tracks left by the speeding car, they were made with regular fuel, which was manually ignited. The filmmakers chose these relatively inexpensive effects, though they had long considered a version where the DeLorean stretched and compressed like a rubber band. However, this effect was ultimately abandoned because it was expensive, time-consuming, and would likely look hopelessly outdated today. The full-size cars weren't the only ones in play. They had toy doubles as well. The filmmakers created several scaled-down models of the DeLorean. These models, suspended in the air on a special arm, were filmed against a blue screen, onto which the required video footage was later superimposed. This technique was later used in the second and third installments of the trilogy. All flying cars and trains were doubled in toy format, which made them much easier for the filmmakers to work with. One of the largest expenses wasn't the toy models or the trio of souped-up DeLoreans, but the sets. The entire town of Hill Valley is unrelated to any real-life location and was built in an open pavilion at Universal Studios. Millions of dollars were spent creating the set of the town square with all the buildings specified in the script. In the first movie, the new facades were used for the scenes set in the 1950s. It wasn't until later in the filming period that the set was deliberately aged to depict the present day, meaning the mid-1880s. The film's production designer, Lawrence G. Paul, brilliantly recreated the atmosphere of the 50s. To do so, he had to study several hundred photos from that era and watch over a dozen films made during that time. Back to the Future features a vast number of entirely authentic details. Paul intentionally reached further back in time, almost to the late 40s, because the real 50s weren't quite as archaic. This slight exaggeration worked in the film's favor, enhancing the effect of immersion in the past. On April 20th, filming was successfully completed, but of course, it was out of the question to release the film in May. The premiere was postponed to August of '85, but when the film was shown to a test audience, according to producer Frank Marshall, the viewers were practically jumping to the ceiling. Marshall admitted that he had never seen a test screening like it. The premiere was rescheduled for July 3rd. To meet the deadline, the editor and sound designers worked around the clock. Some scenes were cut during editing, such as the one where Marty watches Lorraine cheat on a test, and another where George McFly gets stuck in a phone booth. Zemeckis nearly cut the scene of Marty's rock performance, but the test audience loved it so much that he decided to keep it. As it turned out, this was the right decision. When Lucasfilm's Industrial Light and Magic finished producing the special effects, there were only 32 in the entire movie. There was just 1 week left before the premiere. When the movie was released in 1,200 theaters across North America, starting on July 3rd, 1985, it remained the #1 box office hit in the US for the next 11 weeks. The success was astounding. In the US alone, the film grossed $210 million, twice the most optimistic expectations, and the worldwide box office brought in a whopping $380 million. It was a global mega hit and the highest grossing film of 1985. Now 37 years have passed since the film's release. Such a clear reminder of how fast time flies can make one feel a bit uneasy, especially considering that, unlike the characters in the movie, we don't have the option to go back. But in my opinion, Back to the Future serves as a great time machine in itself. With every viewing, it's as if you're transported to another era, a time when movies were good, and the goal of their creators was not to inform audiences of their political preferences, but to ensure that viewers had a great time and experienced positive emotions. Yes, I fully understand that this is a very simplified and largely idealized view of the past, but Back to the Future undoubtedly has this effect, and in my view, that's one of the film's biggest strengths. During the production of the first Back to the Future, no one expected there to be a sequel. The ending, where Doc takes Marty and his girlfriend into the future, was, according to screenwriter Bob Gale, just a joke. It seemed logical to us that the characters would fly off into the sunset towards new adventures. However, the film's massive box office success made the question of a sequel inevitable. By 1986, VHS copies of the film were already accompanied by the final caption, "To be continued." However, production on the sequel had to be delayed since Robert Zemeckis was already working on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. According to Bob Gale's original script for the second film, the characters would again travel to the past, but this time to the year 1967. Zemeckis rejected this concept as it repeated the idea of the first movie. He found it far more interesting to send the characters into the future instead of the past, creating an alternative present or revisiting the past with a sense of déjà vu. Revisiting the events of the first film, but from a different perspective, seemed much more intriguing to him. Zemeckis wasn't against sending the characters to another point in the past, but if they were to do it, it had to be somewhere further back, like the time of the Wild West. This idea was particularly attractive as it allowed the possibility of exploring the Western genre. In the end, it was decided to make 2 sequels. The first would realize the concepts of time travel to the future, an alternate present, and déjà vu, while the second would involve a journey to the distant past. The development of the script was complicated by the actors, although most of the cast agreed to participate in the sequel. Crispin Glover, who played Marty's father, and Claudia Wells, who portrayed Jennifer, Marty's girlfriend, declined to return. As a result, their roles were minimized in the sequel. Marty's father was killed in the alternate 1985, and Jennifer's situation was more complicated. Zemeckis and Gale repeatedly regretted putting her in the time machine with Marty and Doc at the end of the first film, as this made her a necessary character in the sequel. To make it easier for the audience to accept the new actress in the role, Elizabeth's scenes were reshot frame by frame for the ending of the first film, making the scene the beginning of the second. Since the decision was made to produce 2 sequels, Back to the Future Part 2 and Back to the Future Part 3, simultaneously, preparation for filming, including writing scripts and building sets, stretched over 2 years. Filming for both parts took place one after the other, and together lasted almost a year, with 6 months dedicated to Back to the Future Part 2 from February to August 1989. Work on visual effects and editing was conducted concurrently with the filming. Zemeckis had to constantly switch between the set and the studio where post-production was happening for an entire year. The film was released in November 1989, while filming for the third part was still in full swing. Since the action of Back to the Future Part 2 unfolds across 3 different time periods, more sets were needed for filming than for the first movie. Let's start with Hill Valley in 2015. Zemeckis wanted to move away from the then-popular cinematic image of a bleak, dystopian, Orwellian future filled with chrome surfaces, smoke, and signs of decay. This approach seemed cliched and too simplistic to the creators. For this reason, the director did not involve the previous production designer, Lawrence G. Paul, whose filmography included Blade Runner. The new production designer, Rick Carter, was tasked with presenting a future full of optimism, creating a Hill Valley that had changed for the better. The creators were not aiming to predict how the world would transform over a quarter of a century, though they did refer to futurologists' research. As Zemeckis explains, "We didn't want to guess the future. We wanted to have fun on set and engage the audience. It was important to show a transformed but still recognizable future." To achieve this, the creators followed the 15 to 85 principle. 85% of the objects should be recognizable to the audience, while 15% of the details should be new. "The future is built on the past," says Carter. "In most sci-fi films, the space looks as if a designer came in and created everything from scratch. But the world doesn't work that way." Following this idea, the creators recreated Hill Valley's town square almost as it was in the first film, but added more progressive design elements. They decided to move away from the fully glass or metal buildings often seen in science fiction. The park and pond in the square were included not only because the plot required them, but also because, according to Carter's vision, people of the future would be aware of their responsibility for the environment and ecology. Incidentally, the artificial pond, measuring 20 by 25 meters, became one of the most challenging set elements. It was created in just a couple of weeks, right after shooting scenes for the alternate 1985. The second act's alternate present-day setting was primarily filmed in small towns around Los Angeles, such as Pasadena, Monrovia, and Whittier, with the role of Biff's Casino being played by the Plaza Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Overall, the space of the alternate 1985 was given a noir atmosphere through the use of light, shadows, glares, and reflective surfaces. Neon signs, a kind of symbol of vice, became a particularly important element. For the third act of the film, where Marty and Doc returned to 1955, the challenge was to accurately recreate the world created by the filmmakers in the first part. According to cinematographer Dean Cundy, "In most cases, when you return to previous work, it is to redo it, but here we were coming back because we got it right the first time." This meant returning in the literal sense. For instance, the school dance scenes were shot in the same location as they were 5 years earlier. The challenge of creating costumes for the futuristic part of the film lay in the fact that Zemeckis categorically refused to use any references. As costume designer Joanna Johnston recalls, "Bob's concept was based on nothing. We had to create everything from scratch. The only directive was that the costumes should be indifferent. Pressing a simple button would adjust the jacket, shoes, and everything else to fit the wearer." This effect was created using dozens of transparent fishing lines pulled off-screen by assistants. Moving away from the traditional metallic style often seen in science fiction, Johnston designed costumes in bright colors, experimenting with different types of fabrics and materials. Particularly notable is the transparent plastic tie she designed for Doc. Regarding the color choices for the main characters' costumes, Johnston often played with combinations found in the first film. For example, Marty's futuristic outfit is close in color to what we saw earlier: blue jeans, a red and black jacket, and white sneakers. In addition to the main characters' costumes, over 150 costumes were created for the extras. The challenge in creating costumes for the third act was the opposite, not in creating something new, but in accurately reconstructing what already existed, meaning the costumes from the first part. Almost all of the original costumes were either lost or not found, so they had to be remade from scratch. Interestingly, not only were the costumes and interiors recreated, but even the extras from the first film were brought back for the dance scene. As in the first Back to the Future, prosthetic makeup played a huge role in the sequel. While in the first film, the characters played by Leah Thompson, Crispin Glover, and Thomas Wilson had to be aged by 30 years. This time, it was 60 years. Michael J. Fox wore prosthetic makeup for the first time, and he did so for 2 characters, the older Marty McFly and his daughter Marlene McFly. Each makeup application took 4 hours, which Fox describes as not the most pleasant experience of his life. However, the actor considers the freedom to experiment that makeup provides to be an undeniable advantage, allowing him to change his facial expressions or adjust his voice in ways that would sound ridiculous for a young Marty. The most challenging makeup work was for Thomas Wilson, as scenes featuring old Biff with young Biff or old Biff with his grandson Griff were always shot on the same day. The actor would be in makeup early in the morning to appear as the older character first. Then, it would take about an hour and a half to remove the makeup before Wilson would perform as the younger characters. Prosthetic makeup also helped make Jeff Weissman indistinguishable from the departed Crispin Glover. A separate topic is the cars in the film. Most of the vehicles are futuristic versions of Ford, BMW, and Citroën models. Some cars were heavily modified, such as the Citroën DS, which was transformed into a taxi of the future that Old Biff uses to track down the main characters. Others were only slightly altered. For instance, the Volkswagen Beetle only had its rims changed. However, some vehicles were created from scratch, such as the police car. The main vehicle of the trilogy, the DeLorean, also underwent minor changes in the second part. Its interior was updated, and the wheels could rotate to a horizontal position during flight. Like many of Zemeckis' films, Back to the Future Part 2 became a milestone in the history of special effects and a challenge for George Lucas's company, Industrial Light and Magic, which also worked on the first film. One of the most important effects involves the VistaGlide technology. It was used to create shots where one actor appeared in multiple roles simultaneously. For example, in scenes with old and young Biff, which featured two Thomas Wilsons, in the scene where two docs talk to each other, and in the McFly family dinner scene. The latter was the most challenging because it featured not two, but three Michael J. Foxes. According to Zemeckis before him, this effect was not very convincing because the camera always remained static, and a vertical seam between separately filmed parts of the frame was visible. The director wanted to achieve absolute realism. The robotic VistaGlide technology, developed by ILM, allowed not only camera movement but also provided freedom for the actors, enabling them to walk next to their doubles and even hand objects to each other. After one part of the shot was filmed, the actor would change costumes, apply makeup, and the other part would be filmed. For dialogues, the actor wore headphones in which a pre-recorded track played, to which they would react during the performance. Among ILM's other achievements is the holographic shark advertising the film Jaws 19. It was created using computer animation. The same technique was used to create the neon flashes that occur when the DeLorean travels through time, a method already tested in the first film. The flying car scenes were created in various ways, primarily using chroma key, where miniature models were filmed against a blue screen, which was later replaced with the required background, such as the sky. In some scenes, the model was instead added using graphics to an already existing image. Another full-scale DeLorean model was made of fiberglass. Thanks to its relative lightness, the car could be lifted with cables, which was also used in some of the flying scenes. Speaking of cables, the famous hoverboards about which Zemeckis jokingly claimed were real boards working on magnetic fields also flew with their help. A large overhead rig was built that moved along with a crane. Cables ran through it with boards attached, and the actors stood on them. The actors were bolted to the boards, and the traces of the cables were removed in post-production. The film premiered in theaters on November 22, 1989, the day before Thanksgiving. On the opening night from Friday to Saturday, the film grossed $27.8 million and reached $43 million over the first 5 holiday days of release. By the next weekend, the box office dropped by 56%, earning $12.1 million. However, the film still remained at the top of the box office. The total gross of the film was $118.5 million in the US and $213 million worldwide. By the end of 1989, Back to the Future Part 2 became the 6th highest grossing film of the year in the domestic box office and 3rd in the worldwide box office. That's how Back to the Future Part 2 was made. Leave your opinion about what you've seen in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And since you've watched this video to the end, you'll surely be interested in the video about how Terminator 2 was filmed, which you can watch on the channel. See you soon in the next videos.